Previously, in part 1 and 2 of this series, I camped for 2 nights in the island of Egg, 1 night in Loch Nevis, 1 night in the Sandig Islands, and finally a night in Loch Tarbert, where I got around 30 minute ticks biting into me. I headed for home to remove them all, and to change over from my small Vango Banshee tent to the larger Vango Galaxy tent, as my plan was to camp in a one location for a week, and knew there was plenty of room for a larger tent. Refreshed, relaxed and thoroughly cleansed after a night in my own bed, I had the boat loaded and ready to go to sea again in the early morning tide. I was delighted to see the good spell of weather was still hanging around as I set off down Loch Tarbert. When I head north up the west coast of Scotland, I know Ardnamurchan Point is the crux of that route. Going south, I know the unpredictable Corryvreckan Whirlpool is the crux in that route. Tide times are not suitable for slack water to cross the Corryvreckan, but I was timing it to cross in the ebbing tide, which is normally a lot easier than the flooding tide. Entering the Firth of Lorn, I was delighted to find the sea was almost flat calm, allowing a fast and comfortable cruising speed of around 16 knots. Heading southwards, I decided to go through Oban Bay and then down the Sound of Kerala. Passing the Polestar on the way. She is another Northern Lighthouse ship, used to maintain the large marker buoys around our coastline. Making good progress, I was soon crossing to Easdale, and beyond it, I could just make out the outline of the island of Scarborough, which is the highest in the area. The lighthouse at Flada and Belnahua seemed to fly by, and I was now at the start of the strong tidal flows which run across the sea like fast-flowing rivers. I took the channel that runs between the islands of Lunga and Eilean-du-Mor, passing the reef of Girsdale with the island of Scarborough now dead ahead. Over to port, the Grey Dog's tidal race showed little sign of white water, so I suspected crossing the Great Race of the Corryvreckan would pose no problem. Passing Scarborough, I estimated I was now approximately halfway from Loch Tarbert to Loch Tarbert on the island of Jura, a distance of around 55 miles. Crossing the Great Race, which was flowing into the Corryvreckan Gap, I could clearly see white water heading out to sea on the west side of Eilean-Mor, which is near the southern side of the Corryvreckan Gap. I didn't want to go through this area, so followed it out to sea for a short distance, then decided to avoid it altogether by heading into the gap and passing the eastern side of Eilean-Mor. Although the tide was fast flowing in this inner route, there was no white water. The white water areas are very unpredictable and large standing waves can suddenly appear without warning, so I avoid them like the plague. In my opinion, you require a reasonably powerful outboard to navigate the Corryvreckan, even in calm conditions, unless of course it's slack water. Now that I had crossed the Great Race of the Corryvreckan Gap, I was at Jura and following its lovely and remote coastline. There's a small sheltered sandy bay shown in my OS map, and I have always wondered if it was suitable for camping, so went to have a nosy around. It certainly looked a lovely spot, however the large herd of wild goats put me off taking a closer look. I wouldn't like that lot mooching around my tent in the middle of the night. Besides, Glengarrisdale Bay is only a short jump away. And as I was now choking for a coffee, headed straight there without further delay. I landed in a sheltered sandy bay, then slurped coffee in the warm sun until it was done. Then, instead of admiring the views, I launched my aeroplane to see what it saw. and this is what it saw around Glengarrisdale Bay. The cottage is, of course, Glengarrisdale Bothy, and there's plenty flat grass to camp on. I had no plans to camp here this time around, so after my break jumped back into the boat and continued south along the rugged and remote coastline of Jura. It is one of the last great wilderness areas left in Scotland, unchanged by human hands. Finally the paps of Jura appear on the horizon, and I know it's only a few miles to go before reaching the mouth of lovely Loch Tarbert. When the cottages at Round Talon appear, I know I've reached my destination. I head for a sheltered sandy bay that serves the cottages. I carried all my camping gear ashore to a flat, short-grassed area strewn with wild flowers, then set up the Vango Galaxy tent. It felt like being in a gin palace after living out the Banshee tent. So once set up and settled in, I celebrated my arrival with a Coal Isle of whisky. Loch Tarbert in the island of Jura is one of my favourite places to be, especially in such lovely weather. After a wee dram, I then launched the drone to look the place over. Because the tide goes out quite far where I keep the boat, and because I was here for a week, my next task was to set up a running mooring. At low tide I anchored a small buoy which has a short piece of pipe attached to it. I then fed a 25-metre length of rope through the pipe and tied it to another 25-metre length of rope, plus attached the boat painter to the ropes where I joined them. The ropes were then secured to the shore, carefully keeping them apart so they can't twist over each other. It works well, and I could either pull the boat to shore or back out to its mooring when the tide was in. It's a system that works well, assuming you pull on the correct rope, and I've no knots in the rope that runs through the short piece of pipe, which would cause a jam. The pipe is to help keep the ropes apart so they don't twist over each other, as that can also cause a jam. I only had two 25-metre lengths of rope, so I couldn't cover the full tidal range, but it meant the boat was afloat 3/4 of the time of the tides. Having completed the camp set-up chores, I then decided to backtrack along the coast for around 3 miles and land at Sheehan Bay for a better look and fly around. So it was back to sea for a short while for me. And a little later I was landing in sandy Sheehan Bay, and the drone was thrown in the air. And the drone backed up my thoughts that Jura sure is a pretty place. I was in no hurry to get back to camp, so happily trawled a soft plastic lure behind the boat that's slow tick over speed. I kept it around 20 feet deep water, which gave plenty time to admire the scenery. It also gave me plenty of time to get fed up catching small fish, and I couldn't eat anyway. I enjoyed sausages for supper that evening. So I eventually put the rod away and headed for base camp. The tide was full in when I got back, and by using the running mooring, I knew the boat would still be afloat when I wanted to use it next, even if the tide was 3/4 way out. After my fish-free supper of pork sausages, I headed over to the cottages to see if anyone was around. They belong to the Jura estate and are kept locked, except for the very eastern room, which is always open to the public and used as a bothy. I have never slept in it as it was always a bit manky, but it's been cleaned up in recent years, although it was still empty. I waited patiently to watch the sunset over the island of Colonsay. and another day was done. Unlike previous videos where I give a blow-by-blow account per day, in this video I'm only going to highlight the main incidents and journeys, simply because although I was here for a week, some days I've just lazed around doing little. So 2 major incidents that I will now recall are about Leon the lobster and Albert the adder. As mentioned, it was a lovely spell of weather. In fact, it was a major heat wave. I love Loch Tarbert and the heat wave, except it causes a bit of a problem. My sausages go rancid very quickly in the heat, so I had to head for the nearest shop, a little store in Port Haskey, on the island of Islay, which is 10 miles away by boat. When I got to the little store, I had much the same experience as previous visits during heat waves. They could sell me any flavour of whisky or beer that I wanted, but they had no sausages, milk or cheese, etc. So I had to do with a couple of tins of luncheon meat. Not my favourite food. I had parked the Gurnard in the slipway and was about to return to camp when somebody called across saying, "Hey, I knew I would meet you eventually." I started talking to this guy and it turned out he loves watching my videos and recognised me from them. I mentioned my rancid sausages dilemma and he must have taken pity on me because he produced a lovely living lobster, which I gratefully took and popped into my dry bag. I can only apologise to my lobster donor, as I didn't catch your name. I want to say you made my week. It was extremely kind and generous, and I wish you all the best. I headed straight back to Loch Tarbert and put my prize, still living in its bag, into the sea and tied it to the old pier, which meant I could keep it for another day and it would still be as fresh as the day I got it. I checked on it every time I passed, and in fact grew very fond of Leon the lobster. I considered him almost a friend. I called him Leon after the lobster on YouTube, where its owner bought him from a food store, but couldn't kill him and kept him in his aquarium. It's a favourite YouTube video of mine. Not that I was going to save Leon myself, but I did feel a bit guilty when the time came to eat him. I tried my best to keep him comfortable by changing his water in the bag every day and keeping him cool under seaweed when the tide receded. 2 days later I had a very difficult choice. It was either more tinned luncheon meat or fresh lobster, and as I'm only human I chose the lobster. Leon's time had come. I couldn't be cruel enough to boil him alive, so it was a quickly dispatched decapitate before separating his now dead limbs into a pot of boiling seawater. I wasn't sure how long to cook Leon, but I knew it was only minutes. So when the water started to boil again, around 4 minutes after immersing him, I took him out and set the table to scoff him. I had no salt, pepper or garlic for flavouring, so celebrated Leon's life with a wee dram of cold Islay before swallowing his sweet tender flesh. And I have to confess that although our friendship was very short, I enjoyed every moment of it. If you think I'm rather barbaric by killing and eating a lobster, it's worth pointing out that even something simple, like pork sausages, come from a living pig, slaughtered and cooked to make your sandwich. So once again, I would like to thank the guy in Port Haskey who gave me the best tasting lobster I have ever known or eaten. This old guy really appreciated your generosity. Leon was even better than a tasty pink-fleshed fish. After lunch and another couple of drams, I went to get into my boat for a tour around Loch Tarbert. I got a bit of a fright when I reached the boat, as I swore I saw an adder, a poisonous snake, slide under the floorboards when I went to get into the boat. Initially I wondered if I had too much snake oil with Leon and imagined it, but knew my eyes don't normally play tricks. I wasn't going to share the boat with a poisonous snake, so started to pour water into the area, hoping to flush it out. But no, there was no sign of Albert the adder. My problem was I didn't get a good look at it and only saw around 9 inches of snake tail disappearing under the floor, so I had no idea how big it was. All I knew was adders bite and are venomous, and some people require medical treatment if bitten. I kept on filling the boat with water until it was just above floor level, but still no sign of Albert the adder. Unfortunately, the tide was now receding fast, and I knew if I didn't get into the boat, it would be another 3 hours before it refloated, so I had little choice but clamber in beside the snake. I used the electric pump to lower the water to floor level, but I was still not the happy man knowing there was a snake on board. So my next move was to do a series of fast acceleration and then dead stop moves, hoping this motion would suck Albert out his hiding place. I'm not sure what I'd have done if he did appear, as I was now well out to sea, so I could hardly jump out the boat to escape his fearful fangs if he did appear. I suspected it had now slithered the full length of the boat and climbed into the front locker compartment to keep dry. I took comfort knowing it couldn't get out the locker unless it dived under the floor again. After 3 fearful hours of sharing the boat with Albert, I could take no more, so I landed and opened the front locker, very carefully removing everything stored in it, then poured water into it. That proved too much for Albert, and he eventually swam out the rear floor opening. I had him now. A quick whack in the head with the paddle seemed to stun him enough, although he repeatedly sank his fangs into my fuel line. I then put the paddle end in front of his face and he slithered around it trying to get to me. But I was too quick for him, and a quick golf swing of the paddle hurled him far out to sea. I watched him swim off in the direction of Colonsay and honestly hoped he would drown in his way there. Midges, clegs and ticks I can put up with, but I have no time for poisonous snakes. So that ends part 3 of this video series. In part 4 I head for Islay and Colonsay, so hope you return to watch it. Thanks for watching.